I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to this week's Chrestman Conversation. So first of all, let me apologize for last week. I was on vacation last week. I didn't announce it beforehand because it was kind of a spontaneous vacation, but I was down in Florida for a week visiting my parents, so no opportunity to record a podcast. I'm going to not make it a habit of missing Monday releases. Really try and be in the habit of this. I think I've missed 2 over the last 6 weeks. I don't like that. The goal is every Monday, so that's what we're going to do. But we're going to jump right into it this week because this week we had a fun week. I believe, don't hold me to this, I believe next week we're going to have to talk about the impeachment. Finally, we got things to say about it. We're not going to talk about it this week. We're going to wait another week of hearings. We'll formulate some more opinions, get some more information, and then we'll talk about it in depth. But this week we have big news. So this week Elizabeth Warren announced her Medicare For All plan. She released it. She finally released it. And we are going to deconstruct that in depth. We're not going to talk about the United States healthcare system as a whole. There are a number of problems with it. We can discuss the best ways to fix those problems. But we're going to talk specifically about Elizabeth Warren's plan to fix those problems. The first thing you need to know is that she basically has split it up into 2 parts. So she's calling it a Medicare For All plan. However, it's basically her first 100 days, she'll enact half of her plan, and then she says 2 years into her presidency, she's going to enact the second half. In her first 100 days in office, she said she wants to pass a public option, and then 2 years later, she'll make the big push for Medicare For All. Now, this appears to be a bit of a cynical move. I think that she knows that there is no way in hell that she is passing Medicare For All through Congress. And this is her way of saying, well, we can push for a public option. I'll push for Medicare later, knowing full well that they're never going to get Medicare, but still expanding the public option, which a lot of Democrats would like. I think it's a completely disingenuous move. I don't think she has any intention of actually pushing for Medicare For All. She knows it's politically unfeasible, but I think it's a way to pander. I think as Sanders recedes into the field, she's going to look up to pick up some of these young socialist ideologues, and Medicare For All is a good way to do that. So I don't believe she has any opinion of doing it, but I think that she will pass the public option if elected. It's a cynical move at best. I think the only reason they divided it into 2 parts is because you know it's bound to fail. The plan that she has released would immediately cover all children under the age of 18 and every American family with an income below 200% of the federal poverty line. So that's about $51,000 for a family of 4. Those people would have no premiums, and there would be no cost sharing. The 160 million Americans who get their insurance through their work could choose the public option if they wish. Their employer would then pay a contribution to help cover the cost. People with incomes above 200% of the poverty level would be asked to pay premiums, which would be capped at 5% of your income, and they would have to pay some money out of pocket for medical care. The government plan that she has put forward would cover about 90% of people's medical costs. Medicare For All will cost $52 trillion over the next decade. That's trillion with a T. $52 trillion over the next decade, with about half of that shifting from other sources onto the federal budget. So things that used to not be government expenditures are now going to be government expenditures. So things like private health insurance, which used to cover a lot of healthcare spending. Well, that's gone. We are going to absorb those costs as the American taxpayer, and it's now $52 trillion. Warren says she has a plan to pay for this $52 trillion expense, but anything more than a cursory glance into the actual 19-page proposal that she put out this week shows us that she has a plan, but it is a terrible plan. It is a terrible, unworkable, terrible, awful, no good, very bad plan. Now, the main problem I have with this plan is that anyone who chooses to look at it in depth will immediately notice that it operates off nothing but assumptions. It's just her and her campaign staff throwing out numbers that they just made up. Because when you press them, when you say, where did you get this number? They say, well, those are our estimates. Because then you point to something, you'll say, well, these are not the estimates used by fill in the blank organization for fill in the blank thing. And they'll say, well, we think they're overestimating. And we're going to go through a number of those right now. It just operates off a series of just made up assumptions. So she states that she is going to starkly lower drug prices. We are going to save $1.7 trillion by negotiating harder with Big Pharma. She said they were going to reduce the prices on name brand drugs up to 70%. And that it is in no way going to limit the range of drugs or stifle research into new ones. Now, I don't know how she is going to promise that. I don't know how you can say that you're going to take money away from corporations that manufacture the drugs and then promising that we will still be the innovators of the world. The majority of medical patents come out of the United States. A lot of that has to do with the fact that our pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money and then put that into R&D to develop new drugs, which we then consume. Now, there's a whole big problem about the amount of drugs that Americans take. You guys need to get off the pills. Your anxiety, your depression medications, they're probably not doing you a lot of favors. But that's a whole other topic for a whole other issue. I don't see how Elizabeth Warren is going to come out and say both these things. Now, there are a lot of problems with the way that we pay for medications, and a lot of people will be, myself included, will be more than happy to point out the fact that prescription drugs are a lot cheaper in Canada. But the problem becomes that when you force a company to negotiate with the government and then threaten them, which is what Elizabeth Warren did this week. She said basically that if the companies are either going to take what the government will give them, or she's going to take away their patents and manufacture the drugs publicly. We're currently watching the Democrats impeach the president due to a phone call where he kind of vaguely made some references to something that they're now calling bribery. Again, we're going to do that next week. But how is this not just extortion? Are you allowed to just threaten a company and say, you either do what the government wants or we're going to take your company, we're going to strip you of your patents, and we're going to manufacture the drugs ourselves? That seems like, seems a bit extortion-y. I don't know, a little extortionist. I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll have to think about that one, I guess. But there's this interesting bit, though, that they think that that's okay. And that's fine. It's fine, but we're not gonna save $1.7 trillion by just stealing drugs from the pharmaceutical company, though there is a negotiation to be had there. But that's the first one that she says. She's just gonna force companies to give us things for less money. I don't think it's the government's role to do that, but okay. The second assumption. Warren claims that they're going to save $1.8 trillion over the next decade by operating at an administration cost that's around 2.3% of the health budget. That would be great. 2.3%. There are a lot of people who say that Medicare already operates around 2%. That has been debunked time and time again. That is not true whatsoever. But she's operating off that assumption. She's going to say, well, we're going to operate at what Medicare operates at, which is 2.3% of the health budget. We'll put that into our administration costs. The problem is, again, that number is just completely based on nothing. It is based on nothing. And that's a huge problem. That is a big problem for Elizabeth Warren, because the Urban Institute stated that it was going to cost 6% of the budget, resulting in a net loss as opposed to a net gain. Now, that's no good. That's no good. So, assumption number 3. Healthcare costs are going to grow at a significantly slower pace than predicted. So the federal government currently projects that health spending will continue to increase about 5.5% every year. Under the Warren plan, it assumes that it'll only grow 3.9%. This is going to save us $1.1 trillion, but again, is just based on nothing. It's based on nothing. She didn't cite a study. None of her economic advisors can tell you how they came up with this 3.9% number. It's just a lie. It's just a lie to make up for the fact that they need another $1.1 trillion to make this plan feasible. And there it is. That's where you get it. You just say, well, we're just going to account for the fact that the healthcare industry is all of a sudden going to slow down what has typically been its pace by, 1.5%. Again, based on nothing. The other way that they're going to save money is by changing the way that Medicare reimburses hospitals. They're going to do things like pay package rates rather than different fees for surgical services, and paying doctors and hospital-owned practices at the lower prices paid to those in private practice. She estimates it's going to save $2.3 trillion. According to Warren, if we do this, we're going to be able to pay 110% of what Medicare currently reimburses hospitals for, which this sounds great, except for the fact that this would force a lot of hospitals to operate at a loss. Well, why is that if we're reimbursing at a higher rate than Medicare already reimburses? Because the government's health plans do not fund hospitals already. A RAND study looked at $13 billion in healthcare spending at 1,600 hospitals in 25 different states. The researchers found a gap between the prices Medicare and private insurance-paid hospitals. The gap increased from 2015 to 2017. Specifically, private insurers in 2015, on average, paid 236% of the Medicare rates. And by 2017, that had grown to 241% of the Medicare rates. So if we get rid of private insurance and then we force hospitals to operate at 241% less monetary incentive than they are used to, they're not going to know how to keep the lights on. Presumably, we are going to have to lower the salaries of staff at the hospitals. This means doctors, which, again, prepare for a drop-off in the amount of people who go into the medical field when you start lowering the pay of healthcare workers. Because 10 years in medical school sounds a lot less appealing when you get out and make a fraction of what doctors make today. This was brought up to Bernie Sanders at one point, and he said, well, we'll figure out ways around that. As if we're just going to magically incentivize people to go to school. He said things like the government will just have to start paying for medical school. So your idea for a lack of physicians is just to make school free for physicians. That's the big incentive structure. It's not the fact that they're going to spend 10 years in school to make no money, but you're going to get rid of their debt, and therefore they'll make it all up. Well, that's not the way it works. It's really not. You're not going to take someone who gets out, a cardiologist who makes $500,000 a year, and then give them $130,000 a year and expect to have the same caliber of person take that job. People who get into the medical field, a lot of them want to help people, but a lot of them want to live a certain kind of lifestyle. That's where you go to school a long time for a prestige job to make a lot of money to afford a very nice lifestyle. That's why some people get into the medical field. And I would actually venture that that's why a lot of people get into the medical field. And so we're going to just pay people less money. That's why we're going to save money. We're just not going to pay doctors. So you say, Tyler, all these things so far have not added up to a lot of money. That's not a lot in the trillions. Where are we getting these trillions from? Because, you're talking $1 trillion here, $2 trillion there. Where are the trillions? We need more. We need 52 trillion. Where are we getting them from? Well, guys, come on. This is the Democrats we're talking about. Where do you think we're going to get the money? We're going to get it from the rich people, obviously. Obviously, it's from the rich people. So what are we going to do? We're going to tax those rich people a 3% wealth tax. I don't know why I didn't think of this in the first place. We'll just tax the rich, and then, life will be grand. Now, this is not we're not going to implement a 3% tax on wealth because we already have a 3% tax on wealth, according to Elizabeth Warren. We're going to tax an additional 3% just for health care. an additional 3% wealth tax on all of these rich, evil, selfish, money-hungry billionaires out there. We're going to just take their money and we're going to fund healthcare it's because the Democrats know that real charity comes from taking other people's money to give it to who you think needs charity. That's what real charity is. It's taking someone else's money and giving it to the poor. It's not giving your own money. No. I like my money. But I'll take somebody else's money and give it to the poor. That's what Elizabeth Warren's plan is, by the way. And so, okay, all right, the billionaires they're billionaires. They can afford it. What's the harm? Well, let's talk about the harm, because guess what? Just like every other plan that the Democrats this year have thrown out, it's terrible. There are so many flaws, and it's just like nobody has ever looked at. We've tried. Not we, actually. I shouldn't say we. We as the world has tried a wealth tax before. First of all, a wealth tax is never going to pass. It's never going to pass. There's no way to implement it. It's not going to happen. Second of all, let's imagine that for some reason Congress decided to pass this stupid idea, this stupid wealth tax. It is unconstitutional. Absolutely 100% unconstitutional. There is no way that it would be upheld when it was challenged, which it would immediately be in the courts. So let's see. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. Very, very clear that we are not going to tax people by selective groups. We're not going to do that. The billionaires as a class cannot just be taxed because they're billionaires. It's not in proportion or enumeration of the census. You cannot lay a direct tax on people just because you don't like them. If you don't like the rich, you can't just tax the rich. It's not the way it works. So, let's see. Now, what about this idea that a lot of people have that billionaires, well, we just need them to pay their fair share? We've done this before. We've done this before on this podcast where we have talked about billionaires paying their fair share. Let's talk about the 1%, those greedy capitalists in the 1%. The 1% pays 40% of the taxes in the United States. That 1% pays 40% of the taxes. Now, they only make 20% of the income. So they're making 20% of the money. They pay 40% of the taxes. Which bit of this is the part where they're not paying their fair share already? The bottom, the tax burden on the middle class has shrunk in recent years. The middle class is not paying more money in recent years. So in the past 30 years, this is according to the Hoover Institute, in the past 30 years, the bottom 90% of the country, okay, so take out the top 10% of earners, the bottom 90% of the country, they used to pay 50% of the taxes, the bottom 90%. Well, in the last 30 years, now they pay 35% of the taxes. So the bottom 90% has a lower tax burden today than they did 30 years ago. The 1% is paying more. The bottom 90%, 9 out of every 10 people, they are paying less. They pay 35% of the total taxes. Okay? So again, who's not paying their fair share? It's not the billionaires. The billionaires pay a lot in taxes, guys. And this is true. They are paying their fair share. I will guarantee you this. Now, here are the bits about the wealth tax that are just ridiculous. Forget the fact that it's immoral. Forget the fact that it's unconstitutional. Forget the fact that the whole thing is just ridiculous on the premise. The wealth tax is a stupid idea. Always has been. Let's just imagine that it passes and it's upheld in the Constitution and it's implemented as it's written. Let's talk about the fact that it brings in nowhere near the revenue that Elizabeth Warren projects it's going to make. Nowhere near it. So, first of all, let's use France as an example. France implemented a wealth tax. And what happened in France after the wealth tax? Well, 42,000 millionaires left France. So 42,000 millionaire families left France and moved to other countries that didn't have a wealth tax. 42,000. That's a lot of people. And do you think that didn't have an effect on France's economy? Well, if you think it didn't, let me just burst your bubble. So they estimated that the wealth tax in France brought in $2.6 billion every single year. That's a lot of money that wealth tax made for France, except it cost the country $125 billion every year. So you're operating, quick math here, $122.5 billion in the hole because of the wealth tax. Because everyone who had any money had the money to move and say, I'm not going to pay your ridiculously unfair tax. I already pay high taxes in France. So I'm not going to pay this additional tax. I'm going to move to Portugal, which is actually where people move to, and then not pay that stupid tax because Europe is relatively small. You can move across the border very easily. I admit, in the United States, it's very large. If the wealth tax passed, it'd be harder to move, but I guarantee you people would do it. You think there are going to be billionaires and millionaires who sit here and allow their wealth to be stolen by Elizabeth Warren? No, it's just never, ever, ever going to happen that way. So it happened in France. In Europe, a lot of the countries that have implemented the wealth tax have repealed it because it has the exact same effect. You realize that the rich are capable of using loopholes, hiding their money in different ways, opening trusts, moving out of the country. They're not going to pay your tax because it's just an unfair tax to steal their money. That's what it is. You make the money. You pay taxes on it. You spend the money. You pay taxes on it. But when you hold the money, you have to pay taxes on it as well. Is there no way to win? When the other problem with this plan is the implementation of the plan is so unfeasible. So what is the deal if you have stocks, which is what we're talking about here when we're talking about a wealth tax? You take all the money you have, all the money you made, you add up things like your house and your car, your stock portfolio, any businesses you own, any equipment owned by those businesses that you own, they add up all of these things. And then you say, okay, then you're going to give me 6% of everything that you own every single year. Okay, so let's say I own $100,000 in stock. Okay? And I own $100,000 in stock, but I haven't sold any of the stock. I just own it. Well, every year then, you're going to come and you're going to assess the value of my stocks. You're going to charge me $6,000. The only problem is I haven't realized any gains from those stocks. Let's use Jeff Bezos as an example. So Jeff Bezos hasn't realized any gains from owning Amazon stock. He's a billionaire many times over, but he hasn't realized the gains from Amazon stock. But then you come and you assess the value of his Amazon stock and you say, well, you're worth $100 billion. And you own all these houses and all these cars, so give us $6 billion. And he says, oh, I don't actually have the money to do that because I own stocks. I don't have cash that just is worth $6 billion to give to the government. So then what do? You have to liquidate your Amazon stock. So you have to sell $6 billion worth of Amazon stock to have money to pay the government. What do you think that does to the cost of the Amazon stock? Now, this is an example. This is a beautiful example that was used earlier this week. What show was that? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head. It was a beautiful example because it completely captures how ridiculous the idea is. Because what happens when you sell $6 billion worth of Amazon stock to pay the government every year? You lower the price of Amazon. And what happens when you lower the price of the Amazon stock? Well, everyone loses money. What happens when everyone loses money? Is that good for the economy? Do you think a wealth tax has no effect on the economy? You're out of your mind. You do not understand the basic supply and demand of the economy. When you liquidate that much stock, when you artificially increase the supply and you don't increase the demand, you tank the price of the stock. What do you think happens if Amazon stock goes down? What do you think that happens with every Fortune 500 company when all of these people are forced to do this? The Dow, which is currently at records high, you think it's going to stay there when the price of all the stocks drop? No, you morons. That's not the way it works. That's only one of the ways this is unfeasible, by the way. You know, imagine again if you own a business. And just take another real world example. You own a business worth $50 million and you give yourself a nice salary of $500,000 a year. Well, okay, so you make $500,000 from your business, which is worth $50 million a year. If you pay a 2% wealth tax on that business, guys, where's your profit? What money did you actually make from this business which you own? The answer is none. You have made no money because you now owe the government all of the money. So this is a huge problem, and it's just ridiculous. The idea that we're going to tax the rich more and more and more, and every time the government coffers are run dry, we're just gonna turn a millionaire over and shake him down and hope some change falls out of his pocket. It's not the way it works. It's not the way it should work. If the government can't afford it, based on the taxes it already has, the government probably shouldn't buy it, because the government spending is out of control. We don't need more taxes. We don't need more tax money. We need less government spending. That's what we need. So this is a huge problem. This is a big problem, and it makes it very hard. I had someone ask me a while back what they do. What are we going to do as a country when there are so many people who don't feel like they have a home in the political parties anymore? And I said, join the club, because I don't have a good answer, because it is incredibly difficult to sit here and watch the Democrats advocate things which are just knowingly crazy and then say, oh my God, are they going to force me to vote Republican? I've never voted Republican in my life. I am always more than happy to tell people how I vote. There's no shame in how I vote. I've never voted for a Republican. I voted for a Libertarian in one of the races here in St. Louis because it was for our House of Representatives seat. And I looked at the ballot, and the Democrat always wins about 85% of the vote. So I said, well, I'm just going to vote Libertarian, because this is an election that clearly does not matter. And I was right. He won about 85% of the vote. So I have voted Libertarian. I would vote Libertarian again. I'm looking at this Democratic field right now. I'm looking at this presidential race, and I'm saying Democrats like Elizabeth Warren want to wreck the economy. They want to give free college and free health care. They want to wipe out student debt. They want to do all of this stuff, which I say, no, I don't like that. Like, I've been a Democrat my entire life. I don't like any of this stuff. What happened? When did this happen? Was it always like this and I just didn't know, and as I got older, now I recognize it? I don't think so. I think there's been a weird shift in the Democratic Party, and I don't love it, because now you're looking at Trump on one hand, and you say, oh, God, I'm not voting for him. And then you're going to say, oh, but Elizabeth Warren's leading the polls right now. And I say, oh, God, is she more dangerous than Donald Trump? She might be. Donald Trump is ineffective. He's got a lot of, I'm not going to click through my list of his personal foibles, but he is not my favorite person in the world. And then you have someone like Elizabeth Warren over here, Bernie Sanders, wanting to wreck the American economy and fundamentally restructure our society. And I say, yeah, that's actually scarier in some ways than Donald Trump being a lout. So I don't know. Anyway, join the club. It is just terrible out here. Anyway, sidebar over. Let's get back to Elizabeth Warren's plan. I want to put this into a bit of perspective for someone. So the $20 trillion that Elizabeth Warren needs to make up in this plan, basically, the 52 trillion with a T, $52 trillion is the overall figure, but we needed to make an extra $20 trillion. So the $20 trillion that we're going to spend on healthcare is about equivalent to the national debt. Okay? Put that in perspective. This is the total of all of the mortgages in America is $11 trillion. Every mortgage in the entire United States is worth a little more than half of what we're proposing to spend on healthcare. Okay. The current defense budget is about $680 billion a year. So Warren's plan is about 30 times the defense budget, for those of you who always complain about defense spending. The net worth of the entire Forbes 400 is under $3 trillion. So let's just imagine we took the rich, those rich people out in the streets like France, and we sent them to the guillotine, and we just took all their wealth. Well, that's $3 trillion. Okay, now what? Now I don't have an answer. And here's actually the other funny bit too. Elizabeth Warren's plan for the wealth tax works. If you do the math exactly as it's laid out, you look at all the money that the rich people have, and you implement the wealth tax over the course of 10 years, and if it marches out exactly like that, it covers the amount of money she says it needs. Perfect. In an ideal world, you did it. You figured it out. Here's the problem. No way in hell. No way in hell does it work. Again, rich people move. They're going to find new ways, loopholes to hide their money. Trusts, tax havens, they're going to, I don't know, give it away to charity or burn it in a fire. I don't really know. They're not going to pay that money. But then let's just ignore the fact that it's never going to happen and imagine that it does. Well, here's the problem. That plan goes out for 10 years. It's a decade long. What she then doesn't acknowledge is the fact that in 10 years, she's taken 1/3 to 2/3 of the wealth of every billionaire and millionaire in the country. And when you've taken all that money after 10 years, well, guess what? Then you don't have a tax base in which to do the wealth tax for, because all of a sudden you make way less money. And so every year that it is implemented, it makes less money because you've taken 6% of the wealth from the wealthiest class, and they don't recuperate 6% of their net worth every single year all the time. You have a class that's not currently cycling, growing at that rate every single year. So your tax base just shrunk substantially. And then what? Oh, then you can't fund healthcare. Oh, guess what? We already can't fund healthcare, and it costs a fraction of what you're proposing. We already cannot fund Medicare and Medicaid. It's already going insolvent in the next 10 years. What's your proposal? Well, let's explode it in size. What? We don't know how to fund it. I don't understand why people don't get this. It's so simple. Do we have the money to pay for it? Let's not do shitty math and pretend that the answer is yes. The answer is no. The answer is no. You don't get to be charitable with other people's money. You don't get to take from the rich and give to the poor. You're not Robin Hood. You're a civil servant. So frustrating. It's just, the bit about this that's the worst is that it's completely disingenuous, because Elizabeth Warren was never for universal health care until she ran for president and realized that in this climate you have to be. So, anyway, my boy Andrew Yang came out hard against the plan. He's the math guy. He's his campaign selling buttons that just say math on it. I love it. Andrew Yang, you mark my words, people. In the next 50 years, the United States is going to have a universal basic income. Now, this is coming from me, a person who is opposed in principle to any redistributive programs, but we will have a universal basic income in the next 50 years. And it's going to be necessary, but that has to do with automation and all sorts of things, which is a big philosophical argument we're not going to get into right now. But anyway, Andrew Yang came out hard against Elizabeth Warren. He was swinging for the fences. He basically said her plan is nonsense and her math is bad. And as the guy who markets himself as the math guy, I'd take his word for it. He also has been talking about a value-added tax, which would work way better than a wealth tax. And here's a quote from him this week. He said, "The big winners from the 21st century economy are going to be your Amazons, your Googles, your Facebooks. My plan gets the American people a tiny sliver of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, and Republicans will be much more on board with taking that value and putting it into our hands than a wealth tax." And why would we be more okay with that? Because it's much fairer. Again, a value-added tax is something that most industrial nations have at this point, because a value-added tax actually taxes the companies that are most likely to automate away jobs. That's the way it works. So when he's talking about Amazon, Facebook, Google, these kind of jobs, as artificial intelligence and machine learning expands, jobs are going to decrease. There's going to be a huge problem with that in the industrialized world. And that's where this universal basic income is going to come into play. Again, I think we're a little premature on it, but it will happen. It will happen sooner rather than later. And Andrew Yang still be my boy. All right. Ooh, actually, I just thought of it. So that was all I had to say on Elizabeth Warren's healthcare plan. Go read it. I think it was 19 pages in length. It was not very long. It did not take a lot of effort. The first little bit of it is just nonsense, and the last little bit is just saying how great it is. But I think the middle bit is only about 12 pages long. The part where she does the math. Look at her numbers. And then just Google them. Google the numbers and figure out if anyone else agrees with her on these numbers. Again, she just made them up. The campaign just made them up. They're not based on anything. You find two economists at Berkeley who say, yeah, here we go. And then every other economist in the country said, no. What? No. What? You teach economics at Berkeley and you did this terrible math? What's wrong with you? That was my impression of every economist worth his salt, by the way, talking about Elizabeth Warren's, what has most charitably been described as fuzzy math. Anyway, go read it. Go check it out. Don't take my word for it. Go read it. Go look into it. It's the most important topic of the week. Forget the impeachment stuff till next week when we're going to talk about it in depth and we're going to go over it like champions. What I just said about a second ago was the fact that I was trying to think of a good book for the week, and I just thought of one. I don't know why I didn't think of it before. The book of the week is going to be Andrew Yang's book. What is the title of it? The War on Normal People? Sorry, I'm going to Google it real quick. This is an interesting book. I will admit, I've read half of it at this point. I haven't finished it. Yeah, The War on Normal People. I don't know why. I couldn't remember the name. But it's good. It's exactly about why he's for universal basic income and what's happening to our job systems here in America. You want to talk about something real quick, just right here at the end? It bothers me when politicians who have never run a business try to pretend that they know how to run a business. Andrew Yang is a businessman. And not in the way that Donald Trump is a businessman, by the way. Andrew Yang actually did a lot of good in his little company. Not really, but he has a better feel for what the American people are going through than people like Trump or Warren or even Bernie Sanders. Because Andrew Yang spent years now going around and trying to retrain people into more tech-centered jobs. And he learned real quick that the future of the American economy and the future of the world is kind of at stake. But anyway, go read the book. It's interesting. Again, I disagree with him on the implementation of universal basic income, but value-added tax seems like the fairest way to go about taxing these large tech-centered corporations to make up money. But anyway, go read it. Good book. I think that's where we're going to have to leave it today. I don't have any special news and or stuff for the week. So I think that's all. Everyone, please get back to me with some questions, comments, concerns, cookies. I don't know. Anything else that starts with a C I can think of. Go ahead and get back to me. I would love to answer some more questions from people. I think it'd be good. I think it'd be good for the show. Have a little Q&A here at the end. I always love it. And every once in a while I get some nice questions, but sometimes like this week, no questions. But again, I took a vacation week last week, so whatever you're going to do. We're leaving it here. You guys have a lovely week, and I will see you all next Monday.